Hello and thank you for watching. My name is Heather Alexandra, and today we're going to look really closely at one quest in one game. This is the Harvester questline from Deus Ex Mankind Divided. You have been spoiler warned. There's a lot to go over, so let's all dive in. Pull up a chair, grab some wine, do whatever you have to do because we are going in really heavy with this one. This quest has Adam Jensen stumble upon a crime scene in Prague. A mechanically augmented woman has been murdered in a back alley. And before we talk narrative or design content, I merely want to note the environmental work here. It's really great. We take it for granted, but this is a bold scene to stumble into, and the presentation is really good. It captures our interest far better than a random quest giver on a sidewalk. It draws us in, it makes us ask questions, it invites us to explore, and really calls to us that there's something going on here. The thing I like the most about the Harvester quest is that it's one of the few times that Mankind Divided offers a lot of commentary. This is a brutal and violent and really fucked up crime, but through conversation we learn that the police are likely to dismiss it because the victim's augmented. Daria is a nearby witness who encourages us to find more information because she doubts that the cops will do anything. The nearby, overworked, and underqualified Detective Montag makes it clear that he's under pressure from the higher-ups to close the case quickly. They're even encouraging him to arrest the victim's augmented husband, just to make it a quick open and shut case. A particular strength of this early portion of the quest is how much the game actually places us in Adam's shoes. Jensen's an ex-cop, and our first step in this quest is to investigate a crime scene. And yeah, we're not looking at LA Noire levels of detail here, but there's plenty to find that will give us a clearer picture of what happened during the murder. We learn that the victim was partially drugged and stabbed with a needle. We learn that they were strangled. We learn that there are fingerprints on the corpse. The only time things falter is when we're asked to find a piece of evidence that's embedded in a wall right over here. Mankind Divided's aesthetic has a clear mechanical look, which is really great, but when there's lots of brightness or lights involved, it tends to hide objects. The UI doesn't do a good job of highlighting them. Human Revolution had this very intentionally filtered world with a sort of yellow aesthetic that made it easier to find things, and that's not terrible. The whole situation here is not the worst, but it does hamper our ability to sort of pick up the pace in the quest a little bit, so it's a bit disappointing. An important thing to note about these early investigative moments is that we can always press NPCs for more information. We never just select an option once, we can always follow up. Jensen's good at his job. He's thorough and he gives a shit, and this is expressed mechanically by the fact that we're able to talk about multiple topics over and over, the fact that we can be really exhaustive with our dialogue. It's actually kind of a problem, how much Jensen cares. One major problem we'll face through the quest is that Jensen is so competent that he does some of the work for us. We might sit down and figure out a contradiction or see evidence that exonerates a character, but we never have to really sit down and put two and two together ourselves in the game. As long as we find all of the items and all the quest bric-a-bracs, Adam just sort of does the work for us, which is kind of a bummer. But the Harvester is also a strong quest because it's a quest concerned with abstract ideas. Deus Ex is a series that's always talked about broad concepts with a little bit more, ambition than ability. But the Harvester is well written in the sense that it bothers to discuss things at all. Most of Mankind Divided kind of stays really apolitical or even aphilosophical. But here, Jensen and Montag can argue about what it means to serve the law. Do you serve the people or do you serve the ideal? It's really great stuff. It reminds me of the earlier games. Better, deep investigation is rewarded with many options. If you talk to everybody and really get to know these NPCs, you'll have 3 different leads to follow when you get to the end of this section. You can follow up with the victim's husband, you can look into a suspicious anti-AUG politician, or you can examine the murder's similarities with a previous case. I'll tangent briefly to note that this quest makes you travel around the city quite a bit. Mankind Divided does a poor job using augmented citizens as an allegory for racial or ethnic minorities, by which I mean to say that it completely fucks it up. It doesn't know what metaphor it wants to make. It sort of borrows phrases or imagery at any given time to express whatever point it wants to make. It's kind of a jumbled mess. But traveling around the city does offer one really effective interaction that shows what it might be like to deal with discrimination while you're an augmented individual. It happens when you're stopped randomly by cops and submitted to an identification check. This can happen almost anywhere in the city if you're going near some police. The player loses all control over Jensen, and they can't skip the cutscenes. This quest deals with anti-aug bias quite a bit, and traveling the city and risking random stops by the police helps to keep that in the player's mind. For our first branch here, we're going to start with the politician, Radko Perry. He was being blackmailed by the victim, a journalist with a big scandal to report. Talking to him isn't terribly interesting. He's not that fun of a character. He doesn't have a lot of quirks or twists or anything. There's not as much sense of direction in the writing for him as there is with Montag, but we do get a theme that emerges when we're talking to people who serve the public. And that theme is doing what the people want. Perry's not truly anti-augmentation. He takes that position to please his constituents. All the evidence you find on him proves this. There's an online chat with an escort that shows he spends a lot of time with augmented women, and you can find a picture in a safe that proves that as well. The conversation is the more useful evidence. It establishes an alibi for Perry, but it's important to note that you could probably just find that photo, and if you were thinking it over, you might have cause to personally eliminate him as a suspect. Both are inside of his office, and they require a little bit of creativity to get, but Deus Ex offers you the tools you need and the level design options to sort of get where you need to go, at least in this case. The game drops the ball a lot with the husband though, and that's because it wants to be more direct. This is both good and bad. All it takes to exonerate him is one bit of evidence, but Adam also does most of the work. You spend a lot of time talking to the husband, and he has an interesting backstory. He was a soldier, he fought in the Australian Civil War. It's all of this really neat speculative fiction stuff. But you really don't get to do too much. For instance, Jensen is the one that notices that the man's jacket has a patch on it for a mercenary company. A more comprehensive game would have had us notice that ourselves, and then sort of give us the option to incorporate that back into dialogue. There's a lot of cool backstory here, but when it comes to the actual footwork of the case, we don't get a lot to do. The last objective is to find information about a previous case that was similar to this one, and in this case, the level design is the thing that falls flat on its face. There's basically one path into this police station that has the evidence, and there's not really much to discover while you're down there. When you grab the evidence, you don't even really get to compare the two cases or do anything too involved. The process of finding evidence in this quest is pretty cool. Going to places, meeting people, that's really great, but examining and presenting the evidence is a problem. You can pin blame on Perry or on the husband, but clearing them both is as easy as pressing the third option. Adam notes that the husband couldn't have left fingerprints because he has augmented hands, and that the politician was out late with call girls. It's great because it shows us that Jensen is smart, but it's not really fun to play because it's really bad at letting us identify with Jensen or even as Jensen by doing the work ourselves. The quest seems to end at this point, but picks up later on when Daria, the witness Jensen talked to, claims the killer is after her. Rushing to her apartment shows that Detective Montag is already there. And that's some pretty simple misdirection that most players will see through, but the quest is being careful to place doubts in our head. Is Montag the killer? Well, no, probably not. But the rest of the quest is largely about having suspicions and having doubts, and taking risks or taking precautions. Let's assume that we don't take any precautions. In that case, we rush into Daria's trashed apartment. We do a little bit of sleuthing, but we'll probably find this big blood stain on the ground and we'll follow where it leads. It brings us down into the sewers where Daria is being held captive by the killer, but there's a bit of a problem. There's no killer to be found, and regardless of whether or not we stall or we rush to help Daria, she'll pull a gun on us and reveal that she was the murderer, and it launches us right into a boss fight. Now, boss fights were a major issue in Deus Ex Human Revolution, but Mankind Divided gives the player a lot of options for expression. There are environmental hazards that you can bypass in interesting ways by jumping over them with powered legs or sneaking through them with your cloaking og. You can reprogram turrets to aid you. There's multiple levels to the arena. You can sneak below the floor or up in the catwalks. It's even possible to turn certain hazards against Daria, like locking her in a room with gas canisters after you throw a grenade. But there's lots of space here that can set you up for non-lethal options as well. In this scenario, we leave Daria behind, and when we exit, we're confronted by Montag. He wants to arrest Jensen, mistaking him for the killer. Knocking out Daria does make this conversation encounter easier, which matters because you can't simply use your social enhancement augmentations to win this conversation if you have them. That's actually important for telling us about Montag, and it's supported through game mechanics. It lets us know that he's more experienced than he seems. It also forces the player to interact with him with no advantages. It's just two men who don't trust each other, talking and trying to figure out what the hell is going on. It's not hard to get him to stand down, but the situation can be pretty tense. This moment will contrast heavily with the results that come if we don't rush our investigation. Extracare radically changes the direction this quest takes. Astute players will find needles in Daria's apartment and might even notice that her telescope points out the window and right towards Jensen's apartment. Hacking Daria's computer or finding the password will reveal that she was in contact with a doctor named Cipra. Talking to Cipra reveals that Daria was subject to an experiment where cybernetic implants were used to stabilize people with emotional or developmental disorders. The game fumbles a bit with the language here and clumsily handles mental health to an extent. It sort of stigmatizes people with mental disorders. But there is some ambiguity that's added. See, Daria got memories from a serial killer during these experiments, and now she's acting out his murders. Maybe. Cipra insists that she's still making a choice, and Daria also stresses this later on as well. Remember, suspicion and doubt are important here. Was Daria in control or not? Well, we can never know for sure, we just sort of have to make a decision. We have to make a judgment and stick with it. That judgment process is one of the things that makes this quest stand out to me. It would be very, very easy to melt this down and absolve Daria of her actions, but the writing doesn't do that. Instead, it stresses the dangers of risky experimentation without necessarily making Daria blameless. That's a strong decision that makes the confrontation with her a bit more satisfying. It adds a certain sense of mystery and ambiguity that makes the situation a lot more tense. If you have enough information, including an emergency override phrase that you can get from Cipra, it's possible to enter into an extended dialogue sequence with Daria. Other options pretty much always lead to violence. But in this conversation, very real anxieties about posthumanism and transhumanism come up. This is what Deus Ex Mankind Divided should have been doing from the beginning with augmentation. Less cheap metaphors and more hard science. Be it because of the extra personality and memories in her head, or a genuine belief, Daria fears the augmented because she fears the loss of abstract concepts like the soul or even just the idea of what it means to be human. She's afraid that humanity will change because people are changing who they are physically. It's superstitious, but it's relatable and understandable. I wish Mankind Divided had the presence of mind to think in these terms more often. If you talk Daria down, the quest ends peacefully without a boss fight. The route is complicated and it requires the right augmentations and the right conversations, but it is possible to avoid fighting entirely. This is important, and it calls back to the original games. In those, you could avoid fighting Gunther Hermann and Anna Navarra by learning their kill phrases. This isn't as dramatic, but it is a manifestation of a slightly more old-school design sentiment. Overall, I think this quest has a lot going for it. It's sprawling, it has tons of branches, it offers the players many different ways to deal with problems, it characterizes the main character and gives motive to others. It has a true moral dilemma as well. And while the quest suffers issues with streamlining and hand-holding, the Harvester is a real strong point in an otherwise messy game. It has the type of confidence I wish the rest of the game had. And for that, I think it was worth taking a closer look.